So our next speaker is Rebecca Krosnick. She's a PhD student at the University of Michigan. She's interested in HCI and in user programming, and today she's going to talk about live feedback in web automation IDEs. Over to you, Rebecca.
Great. Yeah, I'm excited to talk about our in-progress work studying the usability of web automation tools. So web automation is the practice of creating computer programs that automate web tasks, in particular ones that are tedious or frequent. So if you're a manager and you have to approve timesheets for your direct reports every Monday morning, it's going to take some time out of your schedule. And if instead of doing it manually, you actually had a script to programmatically approve all these timesheets, it would save you some time each week. That's just one example, but there are many others, of course. And so to create a web automation script, people often use a scripting framework like Selenium. So we have a sample script here. And so this script will go to the Google homepage and perform a query. So here, the first line here is actually navigating to the Google homepage. Next, what we need to do is we have the search bar that we need to enter some text into. So first, we actually need to get a reference to that search field. And so to do that, we open the DOM tree, and we, in the bottom right corner, you can see here, this input field in gray corresponds to our search bar on the left. And so we're going to reference this input field using a CSS selector. In this case, we're going to select based on the name attribute whose value equals Q. And so you can see in the code by.nameQ is how we're going to select the element. And then finally, we type weather and hit enter into this field. And so as you can see, creating a web automation script is largely based on selecting UI elements and interacting with them. So we recently conducted a study where we had users write scripts from scratch, and we observed some challenges that they faced. So one of the biggest challenges was correctly selecting UI elements, in particular, choosing robust CSS selectors. So I'll show you a couple examples of the kinds of challenges people had. So imagine that on the Amazon website, you're trying to select an element from the page. You want to actually select the element that has this bestseller label. So a user might try to select that element based on the element on the page that has this class A badge dash text. But it turns out that classes are not unique. And in particular, this class actually would apply to other elements on the page. For example, this badge of holiday gift guide. So if the user is specifically trying to select the element with the bestseller label, this class is not going to be specific enough. So choosing classes that are unique and specific enough was a challenge that we saw. Another challenge we saw was that IDEs are a more unique way of choosing selectors, but it turns out that some websites like Google actually randomly generate their classes and IDs on each page load. So for example, this number 12 would actually be random, would be a different number the next time you load the page. So your script actually wouldn't work the next time you run it. So in order for participants to test their CSS selectors, they either had to run their full script, which is just a slow feedback loop, or some participants had a good strategy of testing individual chunks in their dev console. So here, for example, the participant was checking to see if this class refers to just one element on the page, or if it refers to multiple. And so some future work that we plan to work on is to provide live feedback like this to users on their CSS selectors. For example, showing them error messages of when their selectors are invalid, or warning them that maybe their selector is not unique enough. And there are a number of other challenges that people ran into when they were building their web automation scripts. And in general, we just feel that currently web automation scripting frameworks, it's just code that you're seeing, but rather we think it would be helpful if we provide some UI previews of what the code looks like and what it's doing to the website along the way. So as a first step for this, we have a research prototype where we provide visual context for automation scripts. So in this prototype in particular, the users actually, this is the website that they're on, it's the Southwest website. This prototype actually lets the user record their actions on the web page and generates some initial code based on that trace. And so in addition, it generates a UI animation of the actions that the user took. And then here's the code that's been generated. So let me just zoom in on this part at the bottom for a bit. So here, as you can see, we're seeing an animation of what the code should be doing. And it's showing the user's actions typing into these text fields and clicking buttons. Additionally, if you actually click on lines of code in the script, you can see this orange highlighting is showing the cross-referencing between CSS selectors and the corresponding element in the UI. And additionally, you can see that a given line of code, when you click on it, you can actually see the specific UI. You can see the UI state before and after that line of code. And so this is supposed to help the user really understand what a given line of code does. And so just as a note, currently we're just providing this UI animation for the code for static generated code that's been generated from the recording. But we believe this kind of UI preview would really be helpful to provide as a live preview for in-progress code that users are writing. Just in closing, I think it's interesting to point out that web automation is a unique kind of programming. You're interacting with a UI that you don't own. And so there's a lot about it that you might not understand how it works. And also that UI could change at any time. We have no idea what Google or whatever company is going to do to their website. So I think in general, it's just really, it'd be great if we could provide users more context of what their code is, of whether their code is working and what errors there might be. Thanks.
Okay, great. Thank you, Rebecca. We've got a couple of minutes for questions now, so please either raise your hand or type them into the chat. I think we've got a question from Brian.
No, that's just my clapping.
Okay, sorry, yes, good point.
Jens, though.
Okay, yes, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. It's interesting. So you say that Google and others really try to change the IDs and CSS selectors. So do scripts eventually have to go and behave more like a user and say, don't click on this internal idea, but click on the thing that says go or something like this?
Right. Right. So I think a strategy that people used in the study was to select by attribute values that were more semantically meaningful. So for example, ARIA labels, or if there was a number, like you could potentially, if this ID was more descriptive, maybe if this is the only input on the page, like I guess you could select by the type input, or you could select by the partial string of the ID, for example. So yeah, it took some people some time to realize that they had to choose stable selectors.
Oh, thank you.
Okay, I've got a quick follow-up actually to that. So I'm not familiar with the kind of web automation literature, but is there any interest in kind of developing a more semantic kind of language for web automation that's more directed around exposing the services of an application rather than its GUI?
Yeah, that's a good point. There's like I guess Sakuli from a few years ago, which is a scripting language that lets you embed images into your language. So you can like say to click on the button that looks like this. So I think that is one approach that kind of lets you provide the more semantic description of what you're trying to interact with. I'm not quite sure what it would probably be interesting for me to explore what the right combination of I guess more of CSS selectors and maybe a computer vision or something could be to select the element that the user intends. So yeah, I think maybe that's something I'll explore, or some other attributes that the user could provide to kind of specify what they want to interact with.
Okay, thank you very much, Rebecca.